All right, we got to take you abroad here to what's going on over the move of the embassy to Jerusalem. There are protests breaking out in the West Bank now after President Trump's decision to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. This comes as the top leader of Hamas calls for a new uprising against Israel. CNN's Ian Lee is live in Ramallah with the breaking details. Ian, I was worried for you, brother. I was seeing you there. I know how those situations can devolve very quickly. What is the state of play on the ground?
Well, Chris, this is really a pitched battle right now. You have on the side we're at, we have Palestinians. They're throwing rocks. You can see some of them have slingshots here, putting rocks in them and then tossing it at the Israelis. About, I would say, a few hundred yards in that direction, you have Israeli troops there. We've heard tear gas being fired. We've seen rubber bullets being fired. We've seen a number of people who have been injured. Ambulances, you can see over here, there's a number of ambulances that have staged that are getting ready to ferry anyone who's injured to a hospital. I want to show you something else, Chris. Down here, you can probably see a lot of skins of onions. They're all over the place, pieces of onions, and that's for the tear gas. That helps counteract the effects of tear gas. That's something you see at protests like this. And this one in particular is a protest site that happens from time to time, but we haven't seen this number of people here. And when you speak to people, there's a lot of anger, palpable anger, directed towards the United States, directed towards Israel. And these are the warnings that we heard from leaders is that we got to move back a bit. Hold on a second.
Yeah, Ian, move back. When they start shooting those canisters, they'll overwhelm you really quickly if they hit the ground near you. So safety first. Keep moving back. Make sure your cameraman's getting back to your photographer.
I think we're okay at this point now. You get these kind of situations where you get a couple people start running in, and you got that herd where everyone starts running. That does create that dangerous situation. This is a situation that a lot of leaders in the region warned about, that you could stoke violence and stoke tensions like this, and this is really what we're seeing play out here in Ramallah.
Yeah, we've heard that. I mean, look, this is what yesterday we reported on, that there were some Palestinian leaders, some was just grassroots movement that called for 3 days of rage in reaction to what President Trump had said. Do you get a sense, Ian, and maybe you can't because you're there and so consumed, but is it just Ramallah, or is it stretching, that the 3 days of rage, is it stretching across the region?
What we know in the West Bank is that Bethlehem has also had protests, it's had clashes. And this is a Thursday. Fridays are usually the main days of protest here. And so if we're seeing this many people come out on a Thursday, you could expect to see something similar on Friday. Now, today, Palestinians did call for a strike. Businesses are closed, schools are closed, and you're seeing a lot of people go out in the street and voice their anger. Over here, I want to just show you this. This is kind of what you're seeing, the tires that they're burning, and that's what's creating this thick black smoke that you see in the distance here. Also, an ambulance over here. It looks like someone was injured. They're rushing someone there. But this is really the scene. This is the reality here in this part of Ramallah, where we're going to move back some more now.
Yeah, hey, Ian.
All right.
Listen, get to safety, bud. We get the sense of what's happening on the ground. You let us know if the situation changes, but stay safe, all right? We hear them firing the tear gas. Get out of there.
Tear gas is coming in.
Get out of there.
All right. Yep, we're out. Yeah, the army.
Yeah, just keep running, Ian. Don't worry about broadcasting. Look, the problem is when this tear gas hits, if that's what it is, there are lots of different combinants that they can use to disperse crowds over there. It hits you so fast, and you can't move anymore.
Oh,
it literally freezes you in place. I don't care how many onions you have. And there's a mixed bag with those tires also. They create almost instant thick black smoke.
Yeah.
It's a distraction, but it also removes the field of vision from the military on the other side. And very often it becomes a reason for return of force.
You can see people there struggling afterwards. Let's check in with Ian. How's Ian? Can you hear us? Okay. Right. Ian, how are you?
All right. Yeah, I can hear you.
What's happening?
Hey, I'm all right. We're okay. They just released a volley of tear gas towards the protesters, usually from one of their trucks. Oh, watch out, we got an ambulance coming through. We're able to push back the crowd, but you get these volleys of tear gas, usually from a truck, fires a number of canisters. We got to move off this side again. Ambulance coming through.
Is he watching?
Hey, Ian, do you have any sense on the ground there of what degree of resistance is forming there on the street? Are you seeing weapons, or are you seeing just the typical slingshots of things being thrown and lighting things on fire? Have you seen any other weaponry?
We haven't seen any weapons.
Good.
The only thing we've seen are rocks, slingshots, burning tires, but nothing of nothing to escalate in terms of weapons, of guns or anything. We haven't seen any of that. This is just a kind of a typical protest that you see, where you do have these Palestinians coming out with the rocks and their slingshots and squaring off with the Israeli military.
All right, Ian, do us a favor. You take care of yourself and the crew there. We'll keep you on the IFB. You let us know if the situation warrants coming back to you. But safety first, okay?
Okay, Chris, we'll do.
Thank you very much for the eyes and the calm in that situation. Ian Lee is one of many top-notch pros that we have. Let's bring back David Gregory into this. Look, first of all, we have a raw reality on the ground, all right? It's very dangerous because it can just tip into a bad to worse so quickly, David. And that's the reality. How long it lasts plays into the politics. If the move was worth it, 1 day, 2 days of this, some people injured, God forbid somebody dies, what's the political calculation at which point the move to Jerusalem becomes a negative?
Well, I don't think that the Trump administration was sufficiently worried about the tinderbox aspect of this, that Jerusalem really is. And Aaron David Miller was on the program earlier talking about watch for what happens during Friday morning prayers at the Temple Mount, which is also the site of the Kotel, which is the Western Wall, the holy site for Jews, and Shabbat will be coming as we get into, Friday evening there. So I'm not impressed that this administration has thought through the ramifications of short-term violence, and they have an administration, and Netanyahu's administration, that is supportive of the decision. There is no existing peace process. So for the president to pronounce, well, we're going to take this move, and maybe this will be the catalyst for the peace process, I think the opposite is potentially true here.
John, I see it as a little different just based on the surrogates of the Trump campaign that we've spoken to. They're not going to be cowed by threats of violence. They understand that it's a tinderbox. They understand that something could erupt, and and Donald Trump is not going to let that stand in the way of a campaign promise that he made. I mean, this is how they've explained it to us.
And I think that's how they see it themselves. The protests are predictable. This is not surprising. The question is degree of escalation. When the president spoke yesterday, he used the rhetoric of peace. We're going to try to reset. The goal is peace. But certainly, if that is the goal, is going to go through an increased escalation of some kind of violence. The question is, how much will this tinderbox be lit? Will it be contained to areas of Jerusalem, or could it go wider? Because everybody knew this was the reason the presidents had traditionally said, we may have promised that during the campaign, but the U.S. Embassy functionally needs to remain in Tel Aviv.
Right. Now, these are live pictures from Bethlehem. They are shooting off munitions there. This will obviously be to repel any type of protesting that's going on, violence in the streets. They obviously have a lot more range there. You see water being deployed as well. This is Bethlehem. We're seeing similar types of violence in Ramallah. This was what was warned about, even by officials around the president, saying, let us beef up security, give us time before you make this announcement. But now we're discussing the political implications of this. Is this a sign that this was a mistake, or is it a sign that it was the right move? That was what John Avlon was just talking about, David Gregory, that we're not going to let violent people bully us out of making the right decision. the White House using what we're seeing in our screens right now as a reason that this was the right move?
Well, the notion that you're going to start off a peace process with this as a beginning, I think, is very difficult. And again, we don't know. This is the beginning. There's certainly reason to believe that there could be widespread protests. We've heard warnings about this. And yet this is being welcomed by the Netanyahu government. Again, from a strategic point of view and the United States administration, there doesn't appear to be an indication that they have a truly global strategy here for how they want to approach Mideast peace. I mean, this is coming at a time where you have a gutted State Department and you have a Secretary of State who does not seem to be that enthusiastic about diplomacy, period. And then to reach in and to give away a major concession like this to Israel before a peace process is amazing without extracting any kind of concession. So if this is a president who wants to strike the ultimate deal, he has rushed ahead to the end and made it a pronouncement that I know Palestinians will find highly prejudicial. And I do think it's worth noting the religious dimension to this, the extent to which this is a big move for evangelical Christians for religious reasons, not just political reasons.
Sure. But I think, Chris pointed out something very important, that Secretary Mattis had requested more time. That this apparently is something that State and Defense had said, give us time to bolster our defenses against exactly this kind of eventuality. That was denied for whatever reason, presumably a political calculation. But, the Mideast peace was outsourced to the president's son-in-law. This was moved forward ahead of the Defense Department's recommendations, and now we're seeing the beginnings of a predictable protest.
And just to be clear, we do not believe that what you're seeing there is mortar fire. All over social media, people are saying they're firing at the protesters. Those look like launchers for tear gas. And that is not a long gun on that white truck. That is a water cannon. So let's just keep this in perspective of what we're seeing here. As the situation on the ground changes, we'll bring you new information.
Okay, gentlemen, stand by, please. And we want to bring in now Senator Sheldon Whitehouse of Rhode Island. Senator, I know that you've been watching these developments there in Ramallah and Bethlehem along with us. What are your thoughts?
Well, the public objection is one thing. I think there are factions within the Trump White House that think this all makes good theater for elements of their base. I think what's really dangerous is what this means for our relationship with Turkey, which we still depend on for a lot of basing for our military efforts in the Middle East, and with the Saudis, who the Trump White House have bent over backwards to accommodate as our new best friends in the region. If we look to the Saudis like we're untrustworthy, that limits our capacity to move with them against Iran. And if the Turks decide that this tears it in some respect with respect to their support for our military operations, that creates very, very significant problems. So,
but Senator, I just want to stop you for a second. I mean, what gives you any indication that this is political theater and that the administration is somehow reveling in this as ginning up their base?
Well, I think it's what the person before me just said, that for really strong evangelicals, this is kind of part of the biblical prescription that Jerusalem shall return and all of that. And so I think it's a dangerous idea to let those religious beliefs get ahead of our national interests and our diplomatic interests.
Look, what the White House I believe said, I mean, at least this is what some of the surrogates told us yesterday, is that 3 days of rage doesn't stop the president, or a threat of 3 days of rage doesn't stop the president of the United States from doing what he thinks is right. He's not going to be cowed by threats of violence in Ramallah or the West Bank. There's often violence there. So why let that stop policy and a campaign process?
The point is that this may be a good deal more than just the Arab street speaking. After what we've seen from, in particular, the Saudis and the Turkish Prime Minister, we have, I think, some real diplomatic issues. And if they really decide that that this is a big deal and that they need to push back against us, then they can hurt us in important ways, and it can really degrade our ability to be effective in that area.
But just so I understand, more than the street speaking means this is a proxy for something?
No, I'm saying that there's a difference between what the political leaders in our allied countries say versus the street. And if the political leaders in the allied countries are upset, and it seems that they are, then we may have a lot less room to work with them on other issues. It's important to try to find a coalition and keep it together. And if the Turks are mad enough that they're going to start degrading their support for our military efforts, if the Saudis are angry enough that they feel they've been cornered into a position where they can't work with us on other things, then those government-to-government problems have real ramifications.
Look, the president, Donald Trump, promised this on the campaign. This was one of his campaign promises, that he was going to move the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem. So, you know, he won. And so what would you have him do?
I think he owns the consequences for his decisions like any president does, and that to listen to the advice of your senior diplomats, to listen to the advice of your senior allies, and to listen to the advice of your military experts is not something that ought to be beyond the prerogatives of the President of the United States. A campaign promise is one thing, governing is another, and listening to responsible voices around you is a part of governing.
Senator, we're going to continue to monitor this while you and I move on, because there is other pressing matters to get to today. We've just learned, CNN has just learned, that Senator Al Franken will be addressing the nation, as well as all of you, his colleagues, from the Senate floor today, and be making an announcement. These are on our screen, the list of at least 34 fellow senators and lawmakers who have called for his resignation. What do you want to see happen today?
Well, I think Senator Franken has a pretty clear choice. I think he can either announce that he will be resigning and move on to another chapter in his life, or he can say, look, I'm entitled to my day in court. I have not had my say yet.
And which one do you think is appropriate?
Process.
I mean, should he wait for the Ethics Committee? Which one do you think would you like to see him?
I'm on the list of people who've urged that he should resign at this point.
But why not wait for the Ethics Committee?
But he is within his rights to ask for that, and he knows. You know, he was in those rooms, he was in those situations, and if he wants to stand and fight and defend this through the process that we've set up in the Senate, he has that right.
But why are you calling for it before the Ethics Committee reaches a conclusion?
I think it had reached a point where there were enough allegations and enough credible allegations, and there was a very significant leadership move here that had made, I think, his position hard to sustain. But again, this is a decision that Senator Franken gets to make, and he would be within his rights to say, I am going to stay and see this process through and let my colleagues judge me on a complete record and a recommendation from the Ethics Committee rather than what's just appeared in the public forums.
Okay, let's move on to the Russia investigation. It doesn't sound as if the House Intel Committee got what they wanted out of Don Jr. yesterday. He invoked attorney-client privilege, which is, you know, specious, and they also felt that he exercised amnesia instead of being forthcoming. Your committee, Judiciary, Senate, Judiciary, do you think that you can do better?
It's hard to tell. We've been up against a lot of those same stratagems. We've had the Attorney General come before us and have failures of recollection. I don't know if it's full-on amnesia, but certainly there was a lot of not recalling. And we have also seen a lot of what I consider to be improper assertions of executive privilege, not attorney-client privilege, but these non-assertion assertions of privilege or assertions of privileges that don't seem to have any foundation in the actual privilege are a challenge to get around until you've got a legal procedure to enforce them. Usually it's in reaction to a subpoena. Because Republicans control the gavels, getting to a subpoena is very difficult.
Right, and I wanted to ask you about that. I'm sorry to interrupt, but in our waning seconds that we have here, do you agree with Senator Dianne Feinstein that the chairman, Senator Chuck Grassley, is slow-rolling this investigation on your committee intentionally?
Well, when we've had more and more consequential hearings in my and Senator Lindsey Graham's staffless little subcommittee, than in the full judiciary with all of its staff support, I think there's a case to be made that the Judiciary Committee is not standing up to its responsibilities at this point.
Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, thank you very much for helping us sort through all of the news of the day.
Pleasure.
Chris.
All right, let's go.